This is Voluminous, a listening books podcast for every kind of reader, but especially for fans of audiobooks. This is one of those episodes in which some of the staff here at Listening Books round up some books according to a particular theme and then end the episode with a game. This week we're talking about audiobooks by our favourite narrators. And for that reason, I've asked our audio producer, Nik who's listened to many styles of narration in his work, to join us today. Welcome back, Nik.
Thanks, hi.
Hi, you're usually on the other side of the window.
I know, I'm not used to being in this booth. It's very strange.
Well, it's nice to have you back here. I've also got Claire Bell, our Deputy Library and PR Manager, because as I understand it, Claire, you listen to a lot of audiobooks.
Yes.
Yes, that is the word on the street. So you two are actually in a position to talk about audiobooks by our favourite narrators, more so than someone like me who is listening to audiobooks, but I don't think I've read enough to have favourite narrators yet, because I haven't read enough by the same ones yet. So I'm really looking forward to getting some recommendations from you two. Before we get to the actual recommendations, I thought it might be nice if we started off talking about what makes a good narrator in our book. Pun intended. Haha. What do you think, Nik? What from your point of view as a producer and someone who edits the audio, what are you looking for in a good audiobook narrator?
Well, I get a lot of volunteer readers coming through the doors here at Listening Books, and I do have to sort through a lot of people who send in test read material and things like that as well. So I do get the kind of pick of the pops, as it were. And the main things I look for in a good reader is pace, tone, and characterization. Particularly, we're specifically talking about a fiction novel.
Okay.
Here, really, because we record a lot of non-fiction titles as well that are just kind of straight read informative things that don't necessarily need characterization. But I think for a lot of our listeners and a lot of our members, they'll generally listen to romance novels, crime novels, you know, all the kind of things that everyone likes to read on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So to record those, you need pace, tone, and characterization. Pace in your speed of how you read, so not talking too fast or too slow. Setting the tone, so it's not putting on a voice or anything, but your natural talking voice as a narrator should reflect the tone of a book. So you shouldn't sound upbeat and jolly if you're recording a vicious, brutal crime detective novel.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound like narrating 101. Try not to sound too cheerful if it's actually grim and morbid.
Exactly. But I mean, it even goes further than that. If you're recording something set, I don't know, in Shakespearean times compared to modern day, you might want to have a bit more of a RP in your voice, a bit more kind of straight talking actor, more authority in your voice. So you can even come into kind of more subtle things like that.
Now, I will just say, I'll pick up on that RP thing. So RP is received pronunciation. It's a particular accent. It's generally quite posh, and it carries a lot of prestige. And so a lot of people, when doing Shakespeare, would be very tempted to do that. Although that is not how Shakespeare or his actors would have sounded. And so a lot of people would make the case that virtually any other accent would be preferable. Just making that point.
And finally, characterization. So as a narrator, particularly in third person, you're being yourself telling the story, and then you're jumping into these different voices. Famously, Stephen Fry recording the Harry Potter books. By the end of doing all the books, the audio producers had stacks of CDs detailing each individual voice that he'd recorded so that Stephen Fry could go back to them and listen to them, so get the characters. There's so many characters.
Do you know, I heard that there was, and I can't remember what the phrase was, but I heard that there was a particular phrase that he had real trouble saying, that it was a tongue twister for him. And when he mentioned that to J.K. Rowling, she made a point of making sure that that phrase was incorporated in every book after that.
The phrase was Harry pocketed it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And and halfway
Pocketed
through
it.
recording the first book, he phoned up J.K. Rowling in person to ask. And like you said, it was in every book after that on purpose, just to wind him up.
It is hard to say.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have used that as a vocal warm-up today.
A good example that I found of characterization as well was some books that I listened to as a child. So I listened to audiobooks as a kid, and I'd rent or take out from the library cassette tapes, because that's how old I am. And there's a series of books, kids' books called Pongwithy. It's all about a witch, and it was read by Prunella Scales.
I love her.
And she's an absolutely brilliant actor. She's got quite a posh, natural speaking voice. And actually, I was in research for this, I went back and had a little listen to some of the clips, and her characterization is incredible, because she would talk in her kind of posh, normal talking voice, and then as soon as one of the witch characters would come up, she'd slip straight away into this cackling, high-pitched, screeching voice. And like all the witches have different voices, but they're all so different to her natural speaking voice that you just become completely immersed in the story.
And as you say that, I'm thinking that is particularly skillful, because to manage a high-pitched, shrieking sort of sound without actually irritating the listener, to give that impression without seriously causing that irritation is a skill.
Well, it's like we did workshops with children's schools recently about making audiobooks, and this is exactly one of the things I was talking to them about, because one of the books we were recording, there's an argument in it, and so people wanted to raise their voices and shout, but of course you can't bellow into a microphone. So we were talking about ideas and ways that we can raise voices without actually increasing the volume.
Excellent.
And that all comes back to your tone and characterization.
Yeah, and a bit of mic technique as well.
Yes.
Backing off the mic helps when you're going to get a little louder.
Stamina as well. It's surprisingly difficult to read continuously for 2 or 3 hours. I've occasionally done some copyright notices which are very kind of one level, and I can't do more than 5 or 6.
Really? Well, it is the same sort of thing over and over again, which means that it's tedious, not just... Whereas I think if you're reading fresh material...
You would hope you could keep...
I mean, it's still tiring, but it's different from being tedious, I think. Yeah.
You see it with every reader who comes into our studios. We do full days where we can, because I try and make the most of the reader's time. So try and pack in as much as possible. So we're talking 10 until about 4:30, lunch break in the middle. So maybe like an hour and a half off in total in breaks. And you definitely hear it throughout the day, in that they start making more mistakes as you go on.
Yeah.
Your eyes skip words, because when you're reading a book, you start reading a book, you can get fatigue as well, can't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when you're reading out loud, it's exactly the same. The big difference is you can't skip over words like you can, or reread it as easily as when you're reading it in your head. Yeah,
it does force you to slow down. And there's something about that. If you're saying it out loud, you can't as easily skip a word because it doesn't make sense as you're saying it. Whereas it's quite easy, I think, when you're reading to yourself to skim over. You're just sort of taking chunks of language at a time rather than having to do each one individually. Claire, what about you? What's important to you in a good audiobook narrator?
Oh, let me think. Definitely characterization. I would agree with that. You want it to be the same voice that they're using for each character as they go through, depending on how long the book is. Also, I want a voice that's relaxing. I don't want to be distracted by the voice. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what is a relaxing voice to me necessarily, but something, where I'm enjoying the story, not listening to someone read it to me.
But that it's not necessarily putting you to sleep. You probably don't want that relaxing.
Yeah.
As in, you're not interested in the narrator itself, you're interested in the story. So if you have a distracting narrator, then that can take you away from the story.
Takes me out of the story.
Immerse you.
I mean, and it's fine if it's, a biography and it's read by the person that you're learning about, and it's more of a relationship where they're telling you about their life, and that's great, and I love that. But if it's a novel, that kind of thing, I want something that's almost in the background.
Yeah, I agree. And I tend to, well, it does depend on the type of book, but for the types of books that I am likely to read, which tend to be A, fiction, and B, more in the sort of on the literary side of that, I kind of want the narrator to disappear to some extent into the story, which means that although I appreciate the distinctions between characters, I don't want them going over the top with it. Just sort of subtle shades of difference is good for me, because, too strong of an accent or changing the pitch of a character's voice too much can, to me, be distracting. And suddenly I'm thinking about their performance rather than the actual story.
Yeah. I think that's such a huge part for me if I'm listening to an audiobook.
Nick, did you have any more to add on that, or should we go to our pet peeves now?
Something to consider about who your narrator is and how good they are for the book is gender as well. There's a lot of debate in audiobook production about what, it obviously comes down to the individual book, but what gender works best for a book. At the moment, the majority of books are narrated by men. And unfortunately, it should be more equal, of course. But there's evidence to suggest that books narrated by men make more money. But that could just be because more men narrate books. So,
Well, yeah, put that in the list of no surprises.
Exactly. And there is a big debate. And I recorded a book that's an adventure novel with this female protagonist in the 80s, dealing with kind of being put down because she's a woman in like a male-dominated industry. And I was debating with the author whether it should be a male or female narrator. And they were pushing for a male narrator. I was pushing for a female narrator because obviously I thought that would make more sense.
Yeah.
But once we went through the audition process, it kind of worked out that we ended up with a male narrator, and I think the book worked better for it somehow. Which really surprised me.
I think you were telling me that book had more male characters.
Yes, it did. So more of the surrounding characters, the majority of them were male. I think it was just the main protagonist and one kind of side character who were female in the whole book. And so it meant that narrator could do all those different voices, but they could still portray the woman without doing a silly high-pitched voice.
Which is good, because we'll be mentioning that in the pet peeves coming up. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm going to be careful not to get swamped in this, because I am someone who you'll be surprised to know, I'm sure, that I have opinions about this. But also coming from something of a linguistic background, to me, I can see how this relates to other things beyond audiobooks, like studies that seem to indicate that women's voices are more associated with likability and men's voices with authority. And so if you have an industry that is more weighted towards nonfiction, then there is probably going to be a preference for male voices. And of course, I think the general audiobook audience at the moment skews male rather than female. So that's going to affect things too. I do think that although none of us likes being told what we should like or should consume in terms of popular culture or anything else, I do think it's good for us always to be willing to examine our preferences and interrogate those and challenge them, and I think it's hard in an industry where it's really important for a book to do well. It's really hard to challenge what the audience preferences are, and yet the audience preferences have no chance of changing if they're never challenged. So I suppose ideally the best sellers that are going to make money anyway are the ones that should most be making sure that they get female narrators when it is suitable for the book. You know, when if they don't absolutely need a male narrator for the purposes of the book, hire those female actors, because the industry already doesn't serve women very well, or as well as it could, I should say. So, having stepped off my little soapbox there, and having skillfully avoided getting stuck there for the rest of the episode, which was tempting, I would like us to move on to pet peeves. And without mentioning any specific narrators, because we're not here to trash anybody's body of work or anything, but if there have been any habits or choices made by narrators that really take you away from the book and kind of get on your nerves.
I have a pet peeve,
yeah,
which is a bit of an odd one. Mm-hmm. I don't really like books read by people I know very well, actors.
Oh, interesting.
Because I just think, oh, that's someone I know very well, and I don't believe them as the characters, which is like their whole job.
Which is their whole job.
I mean, I do believe them as the characters. That's not true. It's just I'm just more aware, that it's this person reading a story to me. Rather than
it just being a narrator.
Character in this book that's, experiencing whatever they are experiencing at the time. So it's kind of a pet peeve. I mean, I will still listen to the books.
Yeah.
And I will probably enjoy them, but it's not quite.
So for you, the celebrity name attached isn't a selling point?
Not really, no.
Oh, that's interesting, because I think it is certainly used as a selling point.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And maybe it encourages me to maybe look at it for a bit longer. Mm-hmm. But it won't be the thing that makes me pick up the book and buy it or read it. Or
that makes sense. What about you, Nik?
Well, I thought of this mainly from a producer side when I have narrators in the studio. Vocal tics are quite frustrating.
Yes. Give us an example of a vocal tic.
Well, I think it's normally when people are stopping and starting so much, and when people stop and try and redo a sentence, but they make too much of it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, let me do that again."
And then they emphasize the correct.
It's fine.
Yes.
Everyone makes loads of mistakes.
Yeah.
Don't worry, just redo it. It's fine.
Yeah.
You don't need to. People can get themselves into a bit of a het in the studio because they just keep going over and over and over the same sentence.
Yeah.
Progressively gets worse.
And it makes it harder as the recording goes on because they get more and more bogged down, which makes my job harder because I'm cutting out all the mistakes.
Yes. It sounds like it's frustrating in a few ways. For one, they're kind of getting themselves into a bit of a tizzy, which makes it less likely for them to get it right the next time. For two, I learned, in university doing theatre there, I had a director who once stopped us all and said she didn't want to hear another apology after she had given us a direction or corrected something that we had done, because she said it just wastes time and it diverts your attention away from what you're doing to the apology and then back again. And so it's a waste of your attention and it's a waste of my time. and it's not a matter of what you did wrong. It's not about that. It's not, it's not something that you should feel sorry for. It's just something to correct and move on. And then the final thing that occurs to me in that scenario is that the more ruffled that you get in a recording, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to read that sentence in the same tone and pace as the sentence before it, which will make the correct sentence sound odd next to the previous one.
Exactly. And this happens. It does happen to a lot of people in the studio, particularly if you're new at recording audiobooks and you haven't got the stamina like we talked about before.
Yeah.
So I do understand that and I do have sympathy with it. And I know that I'm the worst for apologising for everything as well. So, you take all of that with a grain of salt, but it's still... It eats into time, so we're quite limited with time, and because all the actors who come in volunteer their time, I know that I'm restricted of how long I have them to come in to record a book. And if if we're at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we've still got 3 or 4 chapters to go, so not quite enough for them to come back the next day or some day in the future to record it, or just slightly too much to finish by the time we need to finish. And so we're really pushed for time. and that puts more pressure on the situation. And then they really get in a tiz, and then you just it gets really, really hard sometimes to just overcome that.
I think one of my greatest pet peeves probably has to do with just misplaced emphasis, which can happen in just an ordinary, just a not great reading of maybe a complicated sentence or something where you think, no, that's not emphasizing the right bit to convey the meaning. But the habit that most irritated me to the point where I think I just refused to listen to the rest of the series was where the emphasis was on all the dialogue tags. So, if you have a character saying something and then you say, she said, this reader would take a huge pause and then really emphasize the dialogue tag. It was huge pause and then she said, and it was one of these things where, like, once you noticed it,
you could not listen to it then.
Exactly. Yeah. It was the only thing that I could hear then, once I noticed it. So to me, that's a big bugbear.
Can I throw in with one more pet peeve?
Yeah.
Is lack of preparation.
Oh.
And this kind of comes into the emphasis thing of, you can tell when a reader comes in and they haven't really prepared. There's a difference between I have one particular reader who's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, and he records a lot of the same types of books in the same series, so they all have the same kind of formula and set out, and so he doesn't need to do a lot of prep. He just goes through and checks the words that might need pronunciation checks.
Sure.
We've got someone come in particularly to record a novel, and they haven't, at very, very least, read through it once to get an idea of the characters and things like that. You can tell they've just kind of had a little look and just go, oh, it's fine, I can sight read, it's fine. As soon as you're in the studio, sight reading can go out the window sometimes.
Sight reading is really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tried sight reading for you if I'm recording, an audiobook review that I've done for the newsletter. And even though I've written it, I still find it really hard to actually read it out loud.
Yeah.
And some days it'll be fine, but other times I'll just make so many mistakes. And I know it well because I've written it.
It's a skill you have to practice. It's a skill in acting, just like mime or stand-up comedy or, I don't know, physical theatre. Sight reading is a practiced skill that takes stamina. You have to work at it.
But also, I mean, when you're talking about a large text, I mean, it's one thing to go into an audition and sight read, which I would feel fairly comfortable doing. Like, that's all right. When you're talking about a huge chunk of text, even things that when you're scanning it don't raise any red flags, suddenly when you're reading it out loud, being recorded, you're second guessing your pronunciations and you think, I should have looked that up.
And sentences change meaning when you read them in a certain way. We've got multiple words which have two meanings.
Absolutely.
So you need to know which meaning you've got to have when you're reading a sentence.
Now that I actually don't trust, I can't trust whether an author has actually used them correctly, so I never know which meaning they mean, because there's the popular understanding of the word and then there's the actual definition of the word, and
throw in the added issue as well of spelling mistakes or wrong words in books, misprints in books. The worst is when it's a word that could work in that sentence, and it's out there trying to work out, well, is it supposed to be there and I'm supposed to read it and the emphasis is supposed to be this way, or is it a misprint and it's supposed to be this word, which would make a bit more sense.
So I have heard that this is why a lot of books now are being produced as audiobooks first before they're published in print, because it's much easier to catch the mistakes when
that
they're
would
read
make a
aloud.
lot of sense.
Yeah. But it's harder on the reader. We ask a lot of them.
I've heard, we do lots of author interviews here at Listening Books, and I've heard quite a few authors actually who say during their drafts, they read it out loud to someone, or they get someone else to read it out loud to them so they can hear it and they can hear the sense. Because books sound different when you read it out loud.
Absolutely. I think that's good advice. Well, I think we've sort of talked generally about what we're looking for and what we don't want in an audiobook narrator. I am ready for some recommendations from you two. Claire, let's start with you. What have you got for us?
Okay. So Nicholas Bolton,
okay,
who reads loads of different things. He does video games. He's amazing. He's one of the people I don't know much about. All I know is his voice, and that's great. Because if he's reading a book...
That's the way you like it.
That's the way I like it. But I think he's a perfect narrator. I don't know whether, the tone of his voice, the level of his voice just resonates in a nice, relaxing register for me. But yeah, I highly recommend any book that he's read. So Stardust by Neil Gaiman, that's a great one. That's a cast recording. So
that's such a great one. Yeah.
He's done Agatha Christie, The Moving Finger. That's a great one. So yeah, I highly recommend anything he reads.
Excellent. So Stardust and Agatha Christie, has he done more than one of the Agatha Christies?
Probably. I haven't listened to all of them.
That's
so
all
I'm
right.
trying very, very hard. So he's one of my favourites. And then Cobner Holbrook Smith. I hope I'm saying that right. Who does all the Rivers of London
That's
books.
right. Yes.
And he just makes all the magical parts of Rivers of London sound really like parts of normal policing work. So he's brilliant as well. So I highly recommend those two narrators.
Excellent. What about you, Nick?
Well, I'd like to throw out something that really, really stands out to me as masterful audiobook reading is Alan Bennett reading Winnie the Pooh. And it's really classic, and I know it might sound a bit obvious, but Alan Bennett has a wonderful voice. He's done so much kind of performance and radio. He's got such a warm, wonderful, quality, friendly voice that is just such a natural fit to him reading Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And it feels so wholesome. The way he reads it. I'd also recommend Tony Robertson reading Winnie the Pooh as well. It's very different. There's a lot more energy to it.
I think what you really want to recommend is Winnie the Pooh.
Well,
Anyone reading Winnie the Pooh.
It's a book that really stands out to me as something that it's got wonderful qualities to it. And it's a great example. They're both great examples of brilliant casting. So even though they're famous voices, which I know Claire might struggle with.
It's Winnie the Pooh, I don't know.
They've found people with that right quality that embodies the character of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
Other recommendations I'd like to make is some more in-house things. So
excellent,
over the year and a half or so, I've been working listening books so far. We've got lots of great readers who come through the doors. So, for example, I've had Emmy Rose recording Fantastically Great Women Who Changed the World.
I'm so glad you mentioned a woman. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay, Claire. You are a woman, so I guess you're on the hook.
And this is like a picture book, but she really does well to bring a lot of energy and dynamism into reading, telling people about these different amazing characters. Bronwyn Price as well has done a lot of work for us.
I love Bronwyn. Bronwyn's amazing.
She's absolutely fantastic. She recorded a trilogy of novels, the Bonaventure trilogy, which starts with a book called The Promised One by David Ulrich. And it is the most wonderful book and well read. And it follows a 13-year-old girl who finds that she's the promised one to animals after...
I proof listened to one of these.
Yes, you did. Yeah. And it follows this character who finds that she's the next messiah to animals and can speak to all the animals and communicate to them. And she ends up going on this crazy adventure through South America of getting kidnapped and escaping and all sorts. Wonderful book.
Yeah.
But Bronwyn really makes the difference in bringing that series to life.
Yeah, she was really good. That was a fun one to proof listen, actually. It was entertaining.
And there's a lot of difficult language in that book. It's supposed to encourage children to grow their vocabulary and things like that. So Bronwyn did really well picking up all of these different words that she's having to get through in the book. So
definitely
recommend.
Absolutely.
That.
Excellent. What else you got?
And just two final names to throw out there. If you're a member of Listening Books and you kind of see either of these names as well, definitely check them out. Peter Beaton, who's recorded audiobooks for us for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, he's...
Really? Is it that long?
Yeah, he was telling me last time he came in. It's... I don't know if it's 30 years this year or if it's nearly 30 years. But yeah, so he's been recording for a long, long time for us. And he's still coming in to do stuff, which is amazing. And he has done lots of lovely things. The most recent thing was Fairy Tales by Carol Ann Duffy, where he just brought all these wonderful fairy stories to life.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm not sure we mentioned that in the fairy tales retelling episode.
Yes. Yeah, it's Carol Ann Duffy's adaptation is incredible. It brings a lot of that kind of the darkness back into some of the fairy stories. And there's a lot of stories in there that I'd never heard of as well, like The Bird, the Mouse and the Sausage, which is a wonderful story.
Who are the characters?
Is it like Winnie the Pooh?
And one last name to look out for is Paul Vates. He does a lot of recording for us as well as Calibre, and he's just the funniest person I've ever met.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's absolutely hilarious, and he records a lot of horrible histories and horrible geography, and he's done a lot of amazing things for us.
His characterizations are fantastic. They really bring those kind of exciting kids books to life, and he's just great fun to listen to.
And he's not afraid to make silly noises in the studio, which is always a blessing.
You're pro silly noises. Excellent. Right, are we ready to play a game and make some silly noises? I'm glad to hear that you are pro silly noises because I'm going to ask you to make some.
Okay. On purpose?
As you are aware, we don't have a buzzer in the studio, so...
Just sorted that out from last time.
I kept meaning to install it, and I just haven't got around to it.
So, and because it's far more fun to make you do funny things, I thought I would ask you to pretend you're an audiobook narrator and say this line in a specific character's voice. Okay, the line is, "I've got this." And Claire, I understand that you have a Poirot voice already in your repertoire.
I'm not going to be able to do it now.
So
Okay.
I want you to say, "I've got this" as Poirot.
Come here, I'll draw you a moustache.
Go on and give it a go.
I've got this. That was awful. Not doing it again.
Well, it will improve as you go on, I think. And Nick, I want you to speak as a female character with an Italian accent. Let's hear it.
I've got this.
Excellent.
Was that female enough?
Well, I want you to pretend you're a really
I'll keep working on it.
bad audiobook narrator.
Oh, that's
for
not
your,
hard. Okay.
For your female voice. Did we mention that with pet peeves with narrators that... No, we didn't mention that?
We alluded to it. We didn't mention it.
That's another one where they kind of go over the top with male or female voices where they do like a super low or super high voice. Anyway, yes, pretend you're a very bad audiobook narrator. We're going for exaggeration here, not realism. Okay, so for this game, we're doing anagrams. Each of these is a well-recognized audiobook narrator. And your first one... Are you ready?
Can I just say,
Yes.
The last episode I was on, it was me and Claire, and we had anagrams last time.
I know.
And I always lost.
But I'm really not as confident this time round.
Okay.
So,
Well,
Yeah. Okay.
we'll see. As always, I do have some clues in store as well if it's proving particularly
Okay, that's right then.
difficult. Okay, so the first one. Shy, pet, fern. So shy, S-H-Y, pet, P-E-T, fern, F-E-R-N. And if you're listening and want to play along, I hope you will. Go ahead and get some pen and paper, see if you can figure this out. This is a fairly obvious one that I've started with.
You say that.
I do say that. Yes.
I've got this.
Oh, Claire.
Stephen Fry.
That's right.
Oh!
First point goes to Claire. Now, I didn't bring my pen, so Claire, will you put a point for
get a
yourself
point
there?
for me.
I'm seeing your tactics.
Are you okay?
That's where I went wrong.
Are we ready for the next one?
Yep.
Okay. Infamy wills it. Infamy, I-N-F-A-M-Y. Wills, W-I-L-L-S. It, I-T. Infamy wills it. This name always comes up in lists of top 10 audiobook narrators. We are looking for an actress.
I've got this.
Oh, Claire?
Finty Williams.
Yes. Another one for Claire.
I'm on a roll.
I think Claire's been practicing.
I think so. I had Williams
Only a
or
year's worth of
Walliams,
practice.
but I couldn't work out what the first name was.
All right, on to the third one. If Claire gets this one, then she's won it. The pressure is on, Nick. Hot, blondish bookmark. Only one of which I think could be said to describe this person. So hot, H-O-T, blondish, B-L-O-N-D-I-S-H, bookmark, B-O-O-K-M-A-R-K. Now, this is an incredibly versatile British actor who's had notable roles in theatre, television, film, radio, and yes, audiobooks. Have you got it? No? He was recently nominated.
One of my recommendations.
I'm sorry, I did not hear your buzzer.
I've got this.
Yes, Claire.
Is it one of my recommendations?
Do you have an answer?
Well, I want Nick to get it. I'm being nice, so I'm giving a hint.
No, that's not how this works.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Cobner Holbrook Smith.
That's right.
Oh,
Cobner Holbrook
of course
Smith.
it is.
Exactly. Yes, his most famous audiobook probably being The Rivers of London, but his performance of Nicholas Nickleby is also very popular. Comes up in the best-selling list in Audible. Shall we do the last two for funsies anyway?
Yeah, go on.
Yes,
You never know, might get one.
I think Nick's just playing
Series
for
3, we'll have our tiebreaker.
Okay. Next one is one limb, sir. One, O-N-E. Limb, L-I-M-B. Sir, S-I-R. With nearly 250 titles to her name, she was drawn to audiobook narration through her work with the American Foundation for the Blind. She won an Audie Award in 2014 for her performance of Keeping Hope Alive, but you may be more familiar with her work in Hidden Figures, Binti, or perhaps Half of a Yellow Sun. And I know this is a tricky one because it's definitely not one we mentioned. It is American. Her first name is also a type of bird.
Oh, that was my theory out the window.
Her first name is a type of bird, and her surname is a unit of measurement for distance. And I think with that, I have run out of clues.
I just want to hear your Italian accent.
Okay. Hey, you forgot this.
Okay, Nick, go on.
Is it Robin Miles?
It is Robin Miles.
Claire definitely didn't show me that on a piece of paper.
I really enjoyed reading about Robin Miles, actually, because she is really dedicated to this form. She's a dancer and an actress outside of audiobook narration, but she is really committed to audiobooks and to production values for audiobooks. And she's not just read them, she's directed them as well. And I just really enjoyed reading what she had to say about what's important to her, that it's not about interpreting the text so much as it is about connecting with the listener. I thought that was a really interesting way.
That's really lovely.
Yeah. Okay. Last one, just because if I went to the trouble to think up all these. Also, in case there are any people doing a tiebreaker at home. Okay, last one. Novel unites jets. Novel, N-O-V-E-L. Unites, U-N-I-T-E-S. Jets, J-E-T-S. And we're looking for a much decorated British actress. She's quite the body of audiobook work. We're talking classics by the likes of Jane Austen, E.M. Forster, George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, Doris Lessing. But also,
I got this.
Oh, Claire is on fire. Who is it?
Juliet Stevenson?
That's right. And Claire is indubitably our champion for today.
I've only got a point because she gave me a point. So you've absolutely.
It's only fair. You helped me last time.
I am thrilled that Claire has won the title this time around. Well done, Claire. I wish I had like a medal or a trophy to give you, but unfortunately, it's just podcast glory. That's
That'll
all I
do.
have to offer. All right, well, that is it from us. I'll be back in a couple weeks with a deep dive conversation with one of our favourite audiobook narrators. I could tell you who it is, but I'm not going to. Voluminous is produced by Listening Books, an audiobook charity providing over 8,000 titles to people with an illness, physical or learning disability, or mental health condition that impacts their ability to read print or hold a book. If that's you or someone you know, you can find out how to access our titles by heading to listening-books.org.uk.